Welcome back, everyone, to History Untold. It's good to have you with us as we dive into the shadows of the past to uncover the stories that time forgot. The tales that never made it into the textbooks, but forever changed the world we live in. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most critical moments of the 20th century. You know the names Kennedy and Khrushchev. You know the tension of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But what you don't know is that the fate of the world didn't rest in their hands on one particular day. It rested in the hands of one man, trapped in a steel tube at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by panic and facing an impossible choice. This is the story of Vasili Arkhipov, the man who saved the world. It's October 1962. For 13 agonizing days, the United States and the Soviet Union have the world on the edge of its seat, locked in a standoff over nuclear missiles in Cuba. The air is thick with the threat of annihilation. Everyone is waiting for a single spark to ignite the fire that would end everything. And on October 27th, deep under the Atlantic Ocean, that spark nearly flew. The Soviet submarine B-59 was lurking in the waters near Cuba when the American Navy found it. To force it to surface, U.S. destroyers began dropping practice depth charges. These were explosive signals, meant to shake the sub, not destroy it. But for the 70-man crew of the B-59, cut off from all communication with Moscow, their radios jammed, there was no way to know that. All they knew was the sound of explosions hammering against their hull. Inside that submarine, conditions were a living hell. The air conditioning had failed. Temperatures skyrocketed past 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The air became thick and toxic. Crewmen were collapsing from heat stroke and carbon dioxide poisoning. They were trapped in a dark, sweltering, suffocating metal coffin, and with every explosion that rocked their boat, their conviction grew. World War III had already begun upstairs. In this pressure cooker of fear and desperation, the submarine's captain, Valentin Savitsky, snapped. He was a military man, and he believed he was under a real attack. He turned to his two senior officers. According to their secret orders, to launch their ultimate weapon, a nuclear-tipped torpedo, all three had to agree unanimously. Savitsky was enraged. He slammed his fist and shouted, "Maybe the war has already started up there. We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not become the shame of the fleet." The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, immediately agreed. The fate of millions, perhaps billions, now came down to one man. The third vote. The flotilla commander, who just happened to be on board this particular submarine. His name was Vasili Arkhipov. While the other two officers were shouting for revenge, Arkhipov remained calm. He wasn't the captain of this sub, but he was the highest-ranking officer present, and crucially, he was no stranger to nuclear disaster. He had been on the infamous K-19 submarine when its reactor melted down, and he helped prevent a catastrophe then. Now he was facing a decision with even higher stakes. In that sweltering, chaotic control room, with his comrades screaming at him and the depth charges still booming outside, Arkhipov did the unthinkable. He stood his ground. He argued that the explosions were not an attack, but signals, desperate attempts by the Americans to get them to surface. He insisted that if a war had truly begun, the sky above would be ablaze. He counseled cool-headed reason in a room boiling over with panic, and he refused. He said no. No to the launch, no to nuclear war, no to the end of the world. His authority, his logic, and his profound courage prevailed. The submarine, instead of firing its nuclear torpedo, surfaced and sailed away. The world never knew. The crisis was resolved days later, and for decades this story was one of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets. It only came to light after the fall of the Soviet Union. We need to be perfectly clear about what was at stake that day. The T-5 nuclear torpedo on board the B-59 was similar in power to the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Firing it at the U.S. fleet would have been seen as the first shot of World War III. The response from Washington would have been immediate, devastating, and total. It would have triggered a full-scale nuclear exchange. The world as we know it would have ended. Vasili Arkhipov died in 1998. He died not as a global hero, but in quiet obscurity. He was never formally honored by his own country for this act. He simply did what was right in a moment of unimaginable pressure and then faded from history. So why don't we know his name? Why are the history books filled with presidents and generals, but not the man who, with a single word, saved more lives than anyone in human history? This is why History Untold exists, to bring these shadows into the light, to remember the quiet heroes who stood at the brink and held the line. If this story moved you, if you believe it deserves to be heard, then help us tell more stories like it. Subscribe to History Untold, share this video with a friend, and let us know in the comments what forgotten stories you want to hear next. Because stories like Vasili Arkhipov shouldn't be forgotten. They should be remembered, shared, and honored. Thanks for watching.